Your car guy here. Today we're going to change the starter on this 2007 Yukon Denali. This same process should work for your Suburbans, Tahoes, Escalades, and about everything else that's in this body style. So first things first, I do like to lift the vehicle slightly. And when I say lift it, I don't mean up in the air. I still have the tires on the ground, but I put a jack under the center cross member underneath the engine. And what I'm looking for is gap right here in order to get some access, because through here I can reach in and get to the back of my starter, which is in here, and we'll show you that to you here in just a minute, and take off my wiring. And then there's just the two starter bolts underneath to remove the starter. But before I do any of that, we're going to disconnect the battery. When I say disconnect the battery, you've got your positive side and your negative side. We're going to take this 10mm nut loose and pull this battery end off the post and make sure that it is held away where it can't fall back onto that post. We don't have to disconnect the positive cable, just this negative cable. So here we are removing that nut. When I say remove, I don't have to take it all the way off. You just got to get it loose. It uses a wedge up underneath to pull the connector tight. Once you have it loose, you can reach in there and just work it up off of the battery, so it doesn't have to be fully removed. Now again, like I said, I want to take and bring that up where it is not going to fall back in and touch the battery. I don't have to disconnect the positive side. Once you open the circuit, there is no current flow and therefore no risk of shorting anything out. All right, so the next thing I want to do is I'm going to come in through the fender well here, and I want to remove off the back of the starter. If you look just through that brake line loop, that is our starter. There's two electrical connections. There's the main battery cable coming in from the bottom. We're going to take that nut off, and then there's a smaller cable coming in at about the 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock position with a small nut. We're going to take those two wires off, and that will disconnect all the electrical from our starter. Then the only thing we're going to have to do is go underneath and take the two starter mounting bolts out. Now, one thing I'm going to do for visibility purposes is I'm going to remove this plastic inner fender in order to be able to get a better view for you to see, but it'll also make it easier for me to reach in there and grab the starter. Now you'll notice this comes up and is separated here and across the top. So what you've got is some small bolts that you'll remove, or screws. You're also going to have these push clips. And what you'll do is you'll pry the center out of that push clip, and then that whole clip will pop out. These clips are just an entire clip, which will pull out. I like to use a pair of side cutters, not to cut it, but close them part way and then use it to just rock those out. So you're going to have several throughout. You'll have here, here, out on the edge, these two here, down here. You'll have another one right here that's going to need to come out up here. Now these are wire harnesses that are on the outside, and I'm going to push those through as well so that I can remove that fender all the way out here and here. Then we have another clip here. We'll have our ones on the back side and our screws. We'll get those removed, and then this is going to open up where we're going to have a real nice view into our starter. So these screw heads are 9/32. Just a matter of putting that on, taking those loose, getting them out of your way. Once you have them out of your way, I like to then work on all of our push clips. So I'll go to that point. I'm going to get my screws out front and back. All right, now that I have the screws removed, I'm going to show you how to undo these clips. What you can do is take a screwdriver, and in this flat right here, you can just go under and start prying around the center to get it up and moving. And if you pry the center out first, you won't break it. Now, they can be a little bit difficult. It's good if you can get under both sides. This is where I like my side cutters. Now, I'm not going to cut it, but what I like to do is get under the edges of that center and squeeze to get a little grip on it. And then I could just use it like a fulcrum and pull it right out. So once the center lifts, it unlocks and you can take it out. Don't worry if you pull the center all the way out, you can simply push it back in once you have the receptacle portion of that out of the fender. So I'm going to get the rest of these out, and then I'll show you how to do the ones that don't have the center. Okay, now for these ones, like I said, I'll just use the same technique and just pry like a fulcrum gently, because I don't want to break these. I want to reuse them. So I'm going to pry while not gripping too tightly, and then I can just reach down and get a small bite, and they come right out. So pretty simple. I'll get out this one, the one right here, one down here, and then I've got a larger one back here. Now that I have those out, you see I have still my two connectors if you haven't pushed them through just from underneath. Now I can reach over, grab at the base of these, and simply pull them out of this inner fender. Now, you may be asking, hey, if I break one of these clips or one of those push locks, what do I do? Good news is, usually your auto parts store will have them in stock, and you'll be able to get new ones. Okay, now we have great vision of our starter. It'll be much easier to remove the wiring from off the back. Now, I've known people that'll want to take the starter loose and then try to dangle it down to get the wiring out. Some of the reasons I don't like to do that is that it is more difficult to break the nuts loose, especially if they're going to fight, once the starter's not mounted, because it doesn't have the resistance. As you're pulling one direction, you're going to have to either use your hands and pull the other direction. And you'll probably be doing it from underneath. There's not a lot of room to get at this from underneath. As a matter of fact, I believe we're probably going to actually take the starter out right through this area here, because it may not fit out going out underneath. All right, I have my ratchet on that 8mm nut to show you exactly where it is, where the small wire connects up in there. I'll get a little back a little bit to get some light. And now we're simply going to remove that. So once we have this nut off, we can just move that wire out of the way, and we'll go on to getting the larger nut with the main battery cable coming to it. Okay, now, interestingly enough, as we were taking that out, the stud broke off, which not a big deal because we're replacing the starter anyway. It'll come with a new one. But we've got it out of the way. Now we're going to take this lower one where the main cable comes in. It's a 13mm, and we'll remove it. Okay, I have both my wires disconnected. I went ahead and pulled this one back out, and that is a main positive wire. This is why you disconnect the battery first, because if that were to hit anything without the battery disconnected, you would have sparks, potential fire. It could cause your battery to explode. So now we'll go underneath, and we're going to get the two starter mounting bolts. Now, from underneath the vehicle, if you look up, there's our starter, and there are the two mounting bolts. All right, so here's our outer bolt. And as you can see, there's the inner bolt up there next to the oil pan. You'll want an extension and a 13mm socket to get these out. I'm gonna undo them, but now you can see there's a lot of stuff in the way here that may make it difficult to lower that starter through this area. It might fit down through this hole between the sway bar and the transmission cooler lines, but it looks like it's going to go a whole lot easier out over the frame rail between that and the exhaust manifold, just right out that side where we took out the wires. All right, I got my starter bolts out of the bottom, and the starter, came out of position. You have to pull it out away from the transmission, which means pulling it forward towards the front of the vehicle, and then just bring it right out over this side. By doing this, we've saved a lot of the aggravation of trying to fit it down through the bottom, where it really would have been a pain. All right, now you'll see I'm pulling the starter right out underneath the exhaust. It may be necessary to remove that heat shield for you, depending on how far settled in your engine is, or even take and do some massaging to the bottom side of it to get some extra room, and then just slide it right up out of there. Or if Those things don't give you enough clearance. You can actually try gently jacking the engine up slightly. Don't have to take any bolts out or the motor mounts, but you can jack it up to get the clearance between the exhaust manifold. This is the easiest way by far versus having to try to go down through the bottom, because there really isn't room without taking a lot of other components off. One thing we are going to do is we're going to take this heat shield that's on the starter solenoid off, because we'll put it on our new starter. This helps keep too much of the exhaust heat from getting into that solenoid and causing a hot start issue where it won't want to start when the vehicle's hot. And this just simply pulls right off, and we'll put it onto the new one. So now we'll get our new starter and get it installed. So right here we've got our replacement starter. This is a remanufactured starter. We're going to put our heat shield back on. Don't bother that it's dusty and dirty. If you want to clean it, I suppose you could, but there's really no point. The way it's going to go on is it just clips over this solenoid. But you see this tab at the front is going to fit right into there. So when you put it on, you just snap it on and make sure it slides back in tight, and you'll be in good shape. Now I'm going to slide the starter right back in there. One of the things you will notice, I did take out a bolt right here that held this clip that holds the battery cable that goes to the starter in place, just to get a little bit better clear access right there. So we've got to fit the starter back through right here, and it is a tight fit, but it will go in. We'll just got to get the tab past, and then the upper part will slide in, and you can lower it right down into place. And we'll go underneath, we'll insert it into the transmission and install our 2 starter bolts that mount it. Okay, so here we are underneath. You can see I've slid the starter back into the transmission, and I've started both bolts. Now I've got a lot of gap between them. I start both bolts by hand and get them screwed in a little ways by hand first. The reason I want to start both before I tighten one is that if I tighten one all the way up, I'm going to have a hard time lining the second up. The one reason I'm going to do them by hand without a ratchet is to make sure I don't cross thread these, because if you do, you can break them off in the block of the engine, and then it's a real pain in the butt to fix. So hand thread them in, get them started, and then tighten them up with your ratchet. So a good idea while you've got this out, before you put this battery cable on, this is where all the power goes to the starter, and you can see just how corroded and a little bit rusty that is. We want a good clean connection here. So what we want to do is take a little bit of sandpaper or a file and clean that up before we install it. There we are, a cleaned up connection, looks much better. Now when we put this cable in, it's going to go on this lower post, and the starter came with a new nut and washer. So you can see our cable on there. This tang here is going to fit right back into that groove, and that was what keeps that cable from turning out of where it should be. Then you'll simply install your nut. Put your lock washer on first, then the nut. Now this needs to be tight to ensure a good connection. However, you must be careful. If you over tighten this, you will break the post off of that starter, and then you're going to buy another one, and that's not cheap. Especially when you get to the smaller wire, which is the trigger wire, which is what tells the car to start. I've honestly broken those off before when installing because I wasn't careful enough. And so it's very important. You want those good and tight, but you do not want to over torque them and break them off. Okay, I've got both of my wires back on and tightened up. A couple of just simple little items to finish up. We're going to take and reinsert our bolt that holds this wire to the frame, and that is also a 13 millimeter. Oh, it's not a difficult thing. Once this is back in, then it's just a matter of reinstalling our inner fender, which you can actually, before you do that, if you'd like to, test and make sure the starter works. And the reason for that would be that if for whatever reason you've got a bum starter from the auto repair place, or if you've ordered it online, you're not going to do the work and then have to just take it right back out. And so it can save you a little bit of time to just do a test before you put the inner fender back in. Now we do have to reconnect the negative battery cable. So I'm going to tighten up this bolt and I'm going to reconnect our negative battery cable. Now here we are at the negative battery cable. We're reconnecting it. And then we can test to verify that our starter is working. Right. So we're connected. Now to test. Battery's connected. Time to test the starter. And there we go. Putting the inner fender back in, we just simply drape it over the tire to start with and just work it into place. Now, before I want to start attaching it to anything, I first want to go ahead and connect this cable back through the two holes. So what I'll do is I'll hold that up, but I'll still be able to reach over it and push those in, and then I can start putting my other push pins in. So just to give an example of how these go in is you would first insert it while this center is sticking out, and then you just simply push that in to lock it into place. And we're all done. Our starter is finished. If you've enjoyed the video, please don't forget to subscribe, like and share, and help us grow the channel. This is your car guy.